Before we dive into the powerful story of a black teen that reveals how her calm resistance turned into a viral movement, challenging an entire system and forcing accountability, let me know where you are watching from in the comment section. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy powerful, emotional, and inspirational stories filled with life lessons. Now let's dive into the story. The streets of Brookdale were alive with the buzz of Saturday afternoon. Cars honked at the busy intersection. A street performer played his saxophone near the coffee shop, and families filled the sidewalks with laughter and chatter. Among the crowd, a teenager named Amara Johnson walked quietly with her backpack slung over one shoulder. At just 16, she carried herself with a calm poise far beyond her years, her face radiating both innocence and strength. She was heading home from the library, where she had spent hours studying for her upcoming exams. But in an instant, the world around her shifted. A police siren blared behind her, startling pedestrians. Two patrol cars screeched to a stop just a few feet away, blocking part of the sidewalk. The sudden commotion drew a crowd of curious onlookers. Amara froze as the car doors flung open and two uniformed officers stepped out. Their movements were sharp and urgent, and their eyes locked onto her. "You, stop right there," one of them barked, his voice filled with authority. Confused, Amara clutched her backpack tighter. "Me? Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Don't move," the second officer shouted as he reached for his holster. The tension in the air thickened instantly. People pulled out their phones, recording the scene as whispers rippled through the crowd. A young boy tugged on his mother's arm and asked, "Why are they yelling at her?" Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She had never been in trouble before. She was a straight-A student, a volunteer at her church, and someone who spent her weekends helping younger kids with their homework. But at that moment, none of that mattered. All the officers saw was a young black teenager, and in their eyes, she fit the description. "Put the bag down and raise your hands," the first officer commanded, his hands still hovering near his weapon. Amara slowly lowered her backpack, her fingers shaking. She raised her hands in the air, her palms open as if to say, "I have nothing to hide." The crowd grew louder. Someone shouted, "She didn't do anything." Another voice added, "Why are you treating her like a criminal?" But the officers didn't listen. They closed in on Amara, their boots heavy on the pavement. One officer yanked her arms behind her and slapped cold steel cuffs around her wrists. The metal bit into her skin, and tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but she stood still, silent. "What's going on? Why are you arresting me?" Amara finally asked, her voice breaking. "You match the description of a robbery suspect," the officer replied bluntly. "Black female, teenage, carrying a backpack. That's all we need." The word stung like a slap. A robbery? Amara had never stolen so much as a candy bar in her life. But here she was, in front of dozens of strangers, treated like a criminal simply because of her skin color and the bag on her shoulder. As the officers pushed her toward the patrol car, the cameras kept rolling. Strangers shouted for justice, some begging the police to stop, others crying out in disbelief. Amara's face, though streaked with tears, remained calm. Her lips trembled, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight. She didn't plead. She simply looked ahead, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. That silence would later become the most powerful image of the day. Because what the world saw wasn't just another arrest. It was a teenager's dignity standing against the weight of injustice. Her quiet refusal to break under humiliation was captured from every angle, and those images would soon spread far beyond that busy intersection. But in that moment, all Amara could feel was the sting of the cuffs, the shame of judgment, and the piercing truth that sometimes innocence isn't enough. The patrol car door slammed shut, and the sirens wailed again as Amara was driven away. The crowd remained, buzzing with anger and disbelief. Phones stayed lifted, recording the moment that would soon become national news. And as the world was about to discover, this was no ordinary arrest. It was the beginning of a story that would challenge the meaning of justice, dignity, and truth itself. To truly understand what happened on that Saturday afternoon, one must step into Amara Johnson's world, a world built on discipline, quiet resilience, and dreams far bigger than the neighborhood she called home. Amara lived with her mother, Deborah Johnson, in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the east side of Brookdale. The building wasn't much: peeling paint, rusting balconies, and a faint smell of fried food that seemed to linger in the hallways. But inside their unit, Deborah had created a sanctuary. The walls were lined with family photos, Bible verses framed in simple wooden borders, and Amara's certificates of achievement proudly pinned above her desk. Deborah worked two jobs, one as a nurse's aide at the local hospital and another as a cleaner at a nearby office building. Her hands were often tired, her back sore, but she carried herself with grace, pouring everything she had into raising her only daughter. To her, Amara wasn't just a child. She was hope itself, a second chance at life after years of hardship. From an early age, Amara understood the weight of her mother's sacrifices. She never complained about wearing secondhand clothes or missing out on school trips they couldn't afford. Instead, she poured herself into books, often staying up late to study by the dim light of a thrift store lamp. Teachers described her as gifted, bright, determined, and endlessly curious. By the time she was 15, she was tutoring younger students in math and science, saving small amounts of money in a jar labeled college fund. Her dream? To become a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the kind who stood up for people who couldn't defend themselves. She had seen too many news stories about wrongful arrests, police brutality, and broken court systems. Even before her own life collided with injustice, she had already vowed, "One day, I'll be the voice for the voiceless." At church, Amara was equally admired. She sang in the youth choir, organized food drives, and spent her weekends volunteering with children's ministries. People often described her as wise beyond her years, someone whose presence calmed others. Kids flocked to her because she treated them with kindness, never making them feel small. Despite her maturity, she was still very much a teenager. She loved sketching her notebook during free time, listening to soft R&B, and laughing with her best friend, Kayla, about silly high school drama. She had posters of her favorite authors and lawyers taped on her wall: Michelle Obama, Bryan Stevenson, and Maya Angelou. Figures she admired because they had all risen above obstacles with grace and strength. But beneath her quiet confidence, Amara carried an awareness that many of her peers didn't. She knew the rules her mother had drilled into her from a young age. Never run in public, even if you're late. Always keep your hands visible when around police. Speak respectfully, no matter how you're spoken to. Don't wear your hoodie up at night. People might assume the worst. These weren't just arbitrary lessons. They were survival codes, rules passed down from one Black generation to the next, born out of painful history and lived reality. Amara understood them, even if she hated why they existed. Ironically, she had been writing an essay about injustice the very week she was arrested. Her teacher had assigned a paper on the theme, "What does justice mean to you?" Amara's first line had read, "Justice is not just about laws. It's about dignity, fairness, and the courage to protect the innocent." She believed every word. That Saturday, when she left the library, she had no idea that she was about to become the living embodiment of her own essay. She had no idea that the very system she dreamed of joining would instead treat her like a suspect because of the color of her skin and the bag on her shoulder. Her mother, meanwhile, was working a double shift at the hospital, proud that her daughter was home studying. She would later recall the moment her phone buzzed with a frantic call from Kayla, who had seen the video online. "Mrs. Johnson, they arrested Amara. They put her in handcuffs. She didn't do anything." Deborah's knees buckled. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. All her worst fears, the very warning she had raised her daughter with, had come crashing into reality. But what no one knew then was that Amara's silent stand during her arrest, the very restraint that had once been taught for survival, would soon become a symbol of strength. That silence would ripple far beyond her small apartment, her church, and her school. It would reach living rooms across America and ignite a conversation that was long overdue. Her world, built on quiet dreams, faith, and resilience, was now colliding with a world of prejudice, misunderstanding, and power. And the collision was about to make headlines. The video of Amara's arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was circulating across Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, gaining traction with the hashtag Justice for Amara. The clip was only 42 seconds long, shaky from a bystander's cell phone, but it told a story that words alone couldn't. It showed a teenage girl, small-framed, in jeans and a hoodie, being handcuffed by two officers in front of the Brookdale Public Library. Amara's face was calm but pale, her hands raised in silent compliance. Her voice was barely audible. "I didn't do anything." The camera then panned to the ground, where the stolen purse lay open, its contents spilling out, a purse that, within minutes, the rightful owner would claim back. The footage struck a nerve. People didn't just see a girl in cuffs. They saw a familiar scene, a black teenager treated as a criminal before any facts were gathered. And this time, they had proof. By that evening, the Brookdale Police Department issued a statement. This afternoon, officers responded to a report of theft at the Brookdale Public Library. Based on witness descriptions, a suspect was detained. The investigation is ongoing. At this time, there is no evidence of wrongdoing by the individual in custody. She was released without charges. The statement was meant to calm the public, but it only fanned the flames. Suspect detained? People demanded answers. Why was she cuffed in the first place if there was no evidence? Why was a minor treated with such aggression? Local reporters rushed to the story. By Sunday morning, Amara's face was on the front page of the Brookdale Times under the headline, "Teen Arrest Raises Questions of Bias." When Amara's mother, Deborah, stepped outside her apartment for the first time after the arrest, cameras were already waiting. Standing on the porch, holding back tears, she said, "My daughter has never been in trouble a day in her life. She was at the library doing her homework. She was handcuffed, humiliated, and treated like a criminal for no reason except the color of her skin." Her words resonated. This wasn't just about Amara. It was about every parent who feared that one day their child might be mistaken for something they weren't. Amara herself didn't speak publicly right away, but her silence only added to the weight of her image. That still shot of her, handcuffed, looking down but standing tall, was now everywhere, shared, retweeted, turned into posters at protests. The real turning point in the investigation came from witnesses at the library. Several people had already spoken on social media, but now they stepped forward officially. A college student testified that he saw a woman drop her purse near the library entrance, only for Amara to bend down and pick it up. Before Amara could return it, police were called on a black girl matching the description of a thief. Another woman admitted that she had been the one to point officers toward Amara, assuming she looked suspicious because she was carrying the purse. That admission would haunt her later, but at the moment, it confirmed what many feared. Amara wasn't arrested because of evidence. She was arrested because of perception. Without the video, it would have been Amara's word against the police. And in a system that too often leaned toward authority, her voice might have been drowned out. But the footage was undeniable. Civil rights attorneys began circling the case, offering pro bono representation. Community leaders called for an independent review of Brookdale Police Department's handling of minors. National outlets like CNN and the Washington Post picked up the story, framing it within a larger discussion of racial profiling. Suddenly, Amara was no longer just a teenager in a small town. She had become a symbol. Inside the Brookdale Police Department, the atmosphere was tense. Officers privately admitted the arrest had been mishandled, but the chief insisted on defending his men. To admit fault, he feared, would expose the department to lawsuits. Yet even he couldn't ignore the optics: a girl with no record, no crime, and a video that contradicted every justification. Meanwhile, Amara was struggling with the sudden attention. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to go back to being a student, a daughter, a dreamer. But she also realized that her silence couldn't last forever. If people were marching with her picture on their signs, maybe she owed them her voice. By the end of the week, the question was no longer whether Amara was guilty. That had been settled. The question now was who would be held accountable for the injustice done to her, and whether her story would bring about real change. The small town of Brookdale had never seen so many cameras outside its courthouse. News vans lined the street. Protesters held handmade signs. Her only crime was being black, justice for Amara, and end racial profiling. What began as a local incident had grown into a national conversation, and the courtroom was now the stage where the truth would be tested. Amara's family, backed by civil rights lawyers, filed a lawsuit against the Brookdale Police Department for unlawful detention, racial discrimination, and emotional trauma. The case wasn't about money, it was about accountability. Deborah, Amara's mother, made it clear. We don't want a settlement to make this go away. We want change so no other child is treated like mine was. The lawsuit meant that officers involved would have to testify under oath. And for the first time, the system couldn't brush the story aside. The courtroom was packed. On one side, police officers in uniform, stiff and silent. On the other, Amara and her mother, flanked by supporters and attorneys. The prosecution began by playing the viral video for the jury. The shaky clip filled the courtroom, the sound of handcuffs clicking echoing through the speakers. Gasps rippled across the room, even though most had seen it dozens of times online. But here, in a courtroom, it felt heavier, official. Ladies and gentlemen, the attorney said, pausing the video on the frame of Amara standing in cuffs, her head lowered. This is not the face of a criminal. This is the face of child. And this, he pointed toward the officers in the room, is the face of injustice. The defense attorneys argued that the officers had acted within protocol. They claimed that they had reasonable suspicion based on a witness description and that handcuffing Amara was standard procedure for safety. But under cross-examination, cracks appeared. Officer Daniels admitted that the only witness description was that the suspect was a young black female with a purse. Officer White, when asked why Amara wasn't questioned before being cuffed, stammered, "We believed we had the right person at the time." The prosecution pressed harder. So a description that could have matched hundreds of girls in Brookdale was enough to justify handcuffing a 15-year-old doing her homework. The silence in the courtroom was louder than any answer. When Amara finally took the stand, the room fell silent. She wore a simple blouse, her hair pulled back, her voice steady but soft. "I went to the library that day because I wanted to finish my English essay," she began. "When I saw the purse, I picked it up because I thought someone might be looking for it. I never even had the chance to return it before the police came." Her voice wavered as she described the arrest. "I kept saying I didn't do anything, but they didn't listen. People were staring. I felt like the ground opened up and swallowed me. I wasn't a student anymore. I wasn't a daughter. I was just a suspect." She paused, fighting tears before looking directly at the jury. "All I want is for people to see me as who I really am, not just what they assume because of my skin." The words hung in the air. Even the judge leaned forward, his expression softened. Outside the courthouse, crowds erupted after Amara's testimony. Clips of her words spread across social media, spurring debates on policing, bias, and justice. Civil rights activists compared her to past figures who had stood up to systemic injustice, not because she wanted to be a symbol, but because she had no choice. Churches, schools, and community groups held vigils. Donations poured in to support the family's legal fees, though Deborah often reminded supporters, prayers and voices matter more than money. "We want lasting change." Though the trial was ongoing, the presiding judge issued a stern statement from a bench. This case is not simply about one girl and one incident. It is about how we, as a community, choose to uphold justice. If we fail here, we fail our children. Those words made headlines the next morning, signaling that this case had grown beyond Brookdale. It was now a referendum on justice itself. By the end of the week, all eyes were on the jury. Would they side with the police, accepting their protocol defense? Or would they acknowledge what the nation already saw in that video, that Amara was not a suspect, but a victim of prejudice? The verdict came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse despite the weather, umbrellas bobbing like restless waves. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating every breath held tight as the jury filed back into the courtroom. Amara sat beside her mother, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't thinking about the cameras, the crowd, or even the officers across the aisle. She was thinking about whether she would finally be seen for who she was, not as a suspect, but as a girl who had done nothing wrong. The jury foreman stood. His voice was steady. "We, the jury, find the defendants, the Brookdale Police Department, liable for unlawful detention and violation of civil rights." The courtroom erupted. Deborah broke into tears, hugging her daughter as supporters clapped, cheered, and cried. Amara, though stunned, remained composed. She wasn't celebrating. She simply whispered, "Thank you." The judge followed with a statement that would echo across the country. This case reminds us that justice must be blind to prejudice, but never blind to truth. Let this be a lesson that accountability is not optional. It is essential. The ruling forced the Brookdale Police Department to pay damages, but more importantly, it mandated reforms. Bias training. Every officer in the department was required to undergo anti-bias and cultural sensitivity training. Policy overhaul. New guidelines were written to prevent minors from being handcuffed unless absolutely necessary. Community Oversight Board. Citizens were granted a seat at the table to monitor police practices. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. For the officers involved, consequences varied. Some were suspended, others reassigned. Officer Daniels, the one who first cuffed Amara, resigned quietly weeks later. But the stain of the case followed them all, their names etched into the public record of a system gone wrong. Life for Amara changed overnight. Strangers stopped her in the street to thank her for her courage. Churches invited her to speak. Civil rights organizations sent letters of support. A local college even offered her a scholarship when the time came to apply. But fame wasn't what Amara wanted. At school, she struggled to focus. Some classmates saw her as a hero, while others whispered behind her back, saying she made a big deal out of nothing. Teachers tried to shield her, but the weight of unwanted attention was heavy. Still, Amara chose to channel her pain into purpose. She started journaling about her experience, turning her trauma into words that would later inspire others. She joined a youth-led social justice group and began mentoring younger students, teaching them to stand tall even when the world tried to shrink them. Brookdale, once just another quiet town, had become a symbol in the fight for justice. Local businesses displayed signs reading, "We stand with Amara." Schools introduced new lessons on equity and inclusion. The library where it all began hosted a community forum on bias and safety. The ripple effect spread further than anyone imagined. Across the country, activists cited Amara's case when pushing for police reforms in their own cities. Hashtags like #SilentStand trended online, turning her into an unintentional icon of resistance. Months later, during an interview, a reporter asked Amara what gave her the strength to stand so silently that day when the world felt stacked against her. Her answer was simple: because silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes, silence is the loudest protest of all. Her words resonated across millions of screens, reminding people that resistance doesn't always come in shouts, but in quiet courage that refuses to break. For Amara, the handcuffs that once symbolized shame had transformed into a reminder of resilience. They had tried to strip her of dignity, but instead, they had forged her into a voice for justice. The town, the nation, and even the officers who once doubted her could no longer ignore the truth. One girl's silent stand had exposed a broken system and sparked a conversation that was long overdue. And though Amara never asked to be a symbol, her story became proof that, even in the face of injustice, dignity has the power to change the world.